proceeding will start shortly.
Order, and welcome to today's session of the Transport Select Committee, when we are continuing our data in transport inquiry, today focusing on infrastructure potentials and issues. Before we get going, could I invite each of you to just state your name and organisation, please, starting at my left.
So Martin Frobisher, I'm the Group Safety and Engineering Director for Network Rail.
Thank you.
Good morning, Milda, Manomaityte. I'm the Innovation Director at the Railway Industry Association.
Good morning, I'm Paul Watson. I'm a Senior Director at Arcadis.
Thank you. We're very grateful for your time and evidence today. May I start with just a sort of high-level question and invite each of you to set out how you see the potential of data to improve the monitoring, delivery and maintenance of rail infrastructure assets. Mr. Frobisher, if I could start with you.
So for us it's absolutely key. So what we've done over the course of the last 25 years, we've steadily built up a database of all our assets, scheduled tasks for maintenance against those so that we consistently do maintenance in an organised way. We gather lots of data using telemetry from the network and we monitor that in real time. And all of that process and data allows us to prevent failures and provide better service for passengers.
Thank you.
Well, over the past years, our members have improved the ways we use the data that the industry has been collecting either manually or in a very technical sort of way. So we're improved the way we understand the data we already have and make it more accessible for people and a wider group of people, and getting a better insights from it to make decisions and make better decisions. But there's also have been significant technology improvement in the way we collect data, and that involves sensors that can see, feel vibrations, feel the heat, they can see through the cameras. We even use robotic solutions to gather data. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities how we use the data that we've gathered, but also how we collect it.
Thank you.
I think for me, data is central to driving efficiencies in infrastructure, driving whole life costs, and improving performance in transport infrastructure for the end users. We'll deal with all 8 stages of the asset life cycle. So by understanding how assets are performing in the operational phase by the use of sensors and things like this that Milda mentioned, we're able to make better decisions in the design stage, which may lead to reduced embedded carbon, or designing assets in ways that are better suited to the end users. So I think going forward, bringing data sets together, multiple data sets from different elements of the transport network, different parts of the sector, and really driving the insights. Ultimately, the key there being is making better decisions. The same in the maintenance phase as well, where if we have more data around how assets are performing, we can come up with better maintenance strategies. So it comes down to that key of making better decisions within the transport sector.
And to help illustrate this, could you give us some examples of a project, an intervention that, if it had been done the old way, if we can classify that, would have been much more expensive or taken far longer, that the use of data has transformed how you've delivered it?
There's lots of examples that we could give. For us, one of the best examples is our plain line pattern recognition technology on our track recording vehicles. So we have trains that monitor the network. They have cameras, high definition cameras that take many, many photos per second, and then the image is processed using artificial intelligence, and that identifies any defects. And that is so much more efficient than somebody walking the track to identify issues. So it's more efficient, it's more repeatable, it provides a better way of monitoring the network.
Thank you. Milda?
I have a good example. One of our members, Siemens, have developed a solution to take the data that railway interlockings collect. So that's, it's a heartbeat of our railways. It collects all sorts of information, and the way it has been shared or gathered, it was sent to a very specific location, so technical sort of spaces where people with specific technical knowledge could understand that. And it's a complex data, but they've developed a solution where you can take all of that information, apply it through algorithms, and present it in an application that is very easily understandable, that when there is a fault, it explains what the fault is. It has preloaded solutions how to fix any faults, and if you actually find a different way, you can input into that information as well. But not only that, it also collects to Google Maps, so that it knows where the interlocking is located, where the fault occurred. And the Google Maps also knows the nearest access to that interlocking. So you can, with this application, look and see, okay, I can plan my route to go and fix it in the best way, and so I know where it is, what the problem is, and I fairly roughly know how I can fix the problem.
And Paul?
Yeah, we've got a good example where we partnered with a technology company out of Canada called Nirickson. And we've got a solution called Bridge Health, and that works with sensor equipment mounted to drones and a technology platform which uses AI and analytics. So that and the benefits there are with accessing structures that are difficult to access, that often need either to stop transport networks running, so you can access it in more difficult situations. And also you can access more regularly, so you can paint a better picture throughout the lifespan of an asset of how it's performing. The data is collected, brought into more of a digital twin environment, and analysed, and then maintenance regimes can be built around that as well. So it's about better access to take access and get the data basically to feed downstream activities.
Thank you. Al, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually quite a similar question to what you just asked, but I'm going to be more specific and probably come to you, Martin, but maybe Milda and Paul you might add in. So you talked about a 25-year timescale for the data that you're looking and collecting. Looking at the East Coast Line, part of the problem for passengers and lots of my constituents is obviously when the lines get caught and the lines come down. So the data that you're collecting, is it allowing you to predict where some of the issues might happen because of the maintenance regime? And is the maintenance regime therefore being changed? And are you seeing improvements through that? I'm just surmising, but looking for you to give me...
The answer is yes to all of those points. So we gather lots of data on the overhead lines. One source of that data is thermal imaging cameras, and that can identify hotspots and defects. So we use cameras to identify with intelligence to interpret the images. So that's one way that we prevent failures. We have another optical system that looks at where the balance weights are, so the adjustment of the lines for tension. So we use technology to observe that. And then our basic maintenance tasks. Every asset is logged in our asset database. Every asset has a scheduled task assigned to it, and then we make sure that we do the maintenance that is required on the required frequency. And then our engineers constantly review the data to make sure that the frequencies that we're setting are right.
And you talked about hotspots. Is it specific areas or specific locations maybe where the lines come down, where they get caught by the trains passing, or does it just happen? It can happen anywhere.
There's many reasons that the wires could come down. So if they're out of alignment, they can get hooked on the pantograph. If there's a stranded wire, a defect, it can part. There can be corrosion failures. There's a number of different mechanisms for it to fail. But by doing regular routine maintenance and by observing it with things like thermal imaging cameras, that gives us an opportunity to minimise the number of failures.
Is that mounted on rolling stock, or is it, as Paul was mentioning, drones, or do you use an amalgamation of all those different options?
To cover the whole network, routinely we use our helicopter with a thermal imaging camera because that can fly the whole line of route. We are working to get authority for drones to go beyond line of sight. So at the moment, the regulations demand that a drone operator works within line of sight. So we've got a project that looks at taking it beyond line of sight. But at the moment, for efficiency, a helicopter can fly the whole line of route, and that's generally the easiest way of observing with a thermal imaging camera.
Martin, Milda, anything to
Yes, we have several members that have developed solutions on train-mounted cameras that looks at overhead lines. And so that is coupled with cameras recording what's happening, but also with machine learning and artificial intelligence that train to recognize how a healthy overhead line and pantograph interaction looks like. And so whenever there is a bit of deviation from the from the way that when the line is healthy, you can send an automatic signal to say maybe the line is sagging a bit or there's a misalignment, but it also detects any during weather events, if there is debris flying and it hits the line, so it automatically sends an alert that something happened. And the power of that as well, if you can combine this with the weather Met Office data, or the weather sort of prediction, you can think about it. Okay, we have weather coming in, and I had a conversation with one of our members when just sort of looking and recording the lines through cameras as well, and detecting that some of the neighbors maybe have trampolines, and sending a bit of weights to weigh down the trampolines to not fly over the line. So there's the power of data comes when you combine multiple sources, and then you have this really rich, interesting intelligence that you can get out and prevent the faults to happen.
But Paul, and I don't know, if I can just add, you mentioned Canada before. Are there any other examples of, are we good practice in this country, or are we taking information from how other people are dealing with data across the world and using that to our advantage?
A good example, I suppose, is we work with the Netherlands around performance-based maintenance as well, which is using a lot of the technologies that Martin mentioned, and that's about gathering data around the state of the railway and operations and sensors and all sorts of different technologies, and then bringing that together to devise maintenance strategies and trying to move to more predictive maintenance. So I think the one thing to sort of mention on that, one of the big challenges is around then the organisational change that comes with that change. So there's technology plus organisation that needs to work together to build a change. I know Martin and Network Rail are working with ProRail in the Netherlands as well to share that knowledge, so that knowledge sharing does happen across.
Through back to you, Chairman.
Paul, do you want to go at this point?
Yes, if that's okay, Chair. Just following round on the data collection and data usage angle there. You talked about the helicopter and the drones and this sort of thing, but I'm going to start with yourself, Martin. You didn't touch as much on trains as the use of cameras on there. On our recent trip to Tokyo, we met with Hitachi and we saw their technology in terms of the way that they're looking at the overhead lines in particular, but also just maintenance generally. But what struck me was, I don't know how much you're using their particular thing, but obviously that runs on certain lines but not other lines. And what my question comes round to is, if you were using their advanced technology on their trains, you would see what's happening on the lines that they run on. But do you have the opportunity to extrapolate that data in any way to see what's happening on other lines, or is that extrapolation not a valid base, if you see what I mean, because of the differences between places? And just one final thing that they threw into the discussion, it wasn't just about the overhead lines, it was about the vegetation and everything around that you could give, to try and think, because whether it be leaves on the line or whatever, it stops the train. So just the use of that data and the extrapolation opportunities was what I was trying to get at.
It's a really good question. Our main monitoring programme is from trains. Network Rail operates a fleet of 13 dedicated inspection vehicles which are going round the network all the time monitoring the infrastructure. They've got a variety of instruments to measure the track, lots of cameras which can provide data processing for observing other issues, and we use that data to assess the network, to interpret and to generate the maintenance plans that we need to do. So we've got 13 vehicles that are scheduled to cover the whole network, measuring everything from cracks in rail with ultrasonic measurements to optical cameras to measuring pantograph uplifts. There's lots of instruments on these trains. Now, you're quite right when you mention the Hitachi Class 800s and other such modern rolling stock. The future is to gather more and more data from passenger rolling stock. So we've got some data that's coming from some trains, but what you've just described is the future. So today we have a dedicated fleet of measurement trains, but the future is about gathering more and more information from passenger and freight trains that are running around the network all the time, processing that data and getting an even better picture.
just go back one slight point, because initially you said about connecting it from passenger trains. I know you mentioned freight in the second part of your answer there, but I assume that the impact of freight trains on a line is completely different to the impact of passenger trains. I guess it's speed versus weight or whatever.
I mean, a freight train has a much higher load behind it. It performs differently, and there are some freight-only lines on the network. At this moment in time, our data gathering on freight lines is from our own fleet of 13 dedicated vehicles. But in the future, more data from other trains that are running on the network is definitely the direction that we as an industry need to move in. And we've got some good pilots, but I think as time progresses, that's a source of more data than we have today.
Anything to add on those points, or do we go back?
Yes, just to add that Northern Train is doing a fantastic program. We're equipping their trains with various sensors, and it's such a good addition to the specialized infrastructure monitoring trains. If you run, because the passenger trains or freight trains, they run on the lines every day and can get so much rich data that complements the very complex data that the specialized trains gather.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to follow on from Carl's question about the international picture, are there other countries you can point to where they've sort of shown the way, what potentially can be done? Or is the UK up there with the leaders at the moment?
My sense is that the UK is right up there with the leaders. And I say that I have, for the last 2 years, I've been European chairman for the International Union of Railways in Paris. So I meet with European railways a lot, and you see different countries developing different technologies, but on balance, the UK is right up there. So Italy is doing well on digital twin. The Netherlands, as Paul has mentioned, is doing really well on telemetry from assets. You see different technologies in different places, but the UK is right up there.
I'm a bit biased to the Baltic countries, being Lithuanian myself. But the one good example in the Baltics is the Rail Baltica project. It's run by 3 governments, so that's a complication in itself. But right from the beginning, the project leaders and they agreed that data is absolutely important, and the project will be run open by default sort of data principles. So any future contractors will have to agree to those principles and submit data to an open portal where you can share it. So it's a good example, and that means also aligning the 3 country standards, the building information model standards, because 3 countries, they all kind of develop slightly different ways, but working in collaboration, making that decision that this is important for us and we will overcome those challenges, whether it's standard or collaboration, it's really helpful when the government is right behind that.
And just to add, I think I'd echo what Milda and Martin has said. That I think key is that there's different parts of the Europe and the world who are doing different elements, and part of it is being able to integrate all of that, and because ultimately we all rely on the same supply chain. So if there's works happening around sensors and things like that, it's about being able to leverage what's happening around, and knowledge sharing is going to be critical for the future.
Thank you. And Milda, I just wanted to pick up on a comment you made in answer to an earlier question about looking at other sort of potential impacts on the rail infrastructure. It's not just monitoring the overhead lines and tracking whatever, but you referenced the Met Office and its predictions for weather. Are we capturing related data that could affect the health of rail assets? You know, I've heard stories that depending on which way a farmer ploughs his fields, that can affect the drainage and therefore the resilience of the track. Looking more widely, are we capturing as much as we could?
It's absolutely right. There's those unexpected outcomes when you have the different sources of information coming in and applying minds, whether it's machine minds or human minds, to analyze the data. There's a lot of interesting projects going on in various sectors, but the beauty and the power of it will come when we actually work in collaboration between all of this. So yes, we might monitor maybe the Earth is a little bit cold in that space, and you have train vibration monitoring, and you see that the track is vibrating, and you have a vision camera, and you have, as I said, the weather prediction. So when you bring all of those informations together, you get that rich insight. There is an opportunity to do better and to work in collaboration, and that's where the sort of the guiding mind, or that the central sort of view to see this part of the network is doing something very interesting, and these people are doing something very interesting. So when we bring them together, that's where the benefit is the best.
And who? Sorry, Martin, did come in.
So I could give a really good example of that. The UK Railway Safety and Standards Board has developed a brilliant risk model for the risk to the network in extreme rainfall. And we're trialling that currently on the north end of the West Coast Main Line, where we take the weather forecast, and we get a very granular weather forecast. We put that into the model, and it predicts the risk of earthworks failures, and then that model tells us the optimum speed to run the trains. So being able to take a really good weather forecast, a really good risk model, and then letting that inform the right speed for trains to operate, I think is a really good technology.
And what additional support from government, from GBR, which we had the draft bill published yesterday, or who else should sort of take the lead in making sure there's that cooperation that you refer to?
First of all, I think we get good support. I think the transport data strategy that has been published by Department for Transport is a good document. So I think we are getting strong support. I think what Great British Railways will bring is it will break down barriers between the companies that operate in the railway. Collaboration and sharing of data is the best way to maximise the benefit. And as those barriers come down and more data is shared, I think we will realise more opportunities. So I think government is doing what's needed. I think documents such as the National AI Strategy, the Geospatial Strategy for 2020 to 2025, they're good documents. We get good support from government, and Great British Railways will help even more.
And just to add, there's an initiative, the Rail Data Marketplace, that is led by the Department for Transport, and it came from the rail sector deal. As of yesterday, I think it has over 600 organizations publishing data with 80 plus data sets. This is really important, and Network Rail and train operating companies and Office of Road and Rail also are publishing the data. So this is where that support is really useful, to encourage the organizations to publish and share their information on the platform, where then you can come in and see all of these data sets and you do something. The other thing that we're doing with Rail Data Marketplace, our members and railway clients, is to understand what problems it can solve. So what are we trying to fix here? So if we say we really want to understand how weather impacts infrastructure and how to prevent that, we can then think about the data sets that we already have and what we're missing, and which organizations or maybe which other sectors we should be working with to ask for that other data that we don't maybe have within the railway sector.
Thank you. Paul, did you want to come back in at this point, or did you cover all your points?
No, I'll come on to like digital twins and things later, if you want.
Later on.
I can do it now if you want.
Yeah,
no, that's fine. You made reference to digital twin, if you like. I think probably just an understanding as to what that is in the short story, if you can in a second. But one of the things that I've read is that the National Data Twin will not be a single digital data twin. Instead, it'll provide the mechanisms that will allow people to bring together information and models. Who do you think those people are that are going to bring that together? Who's going to use the data that's provided by the digital twin? Yes, we seem to be starting with you, Martin, but maybe I should start at the other end next time.
So it's a really good question, what is a digital twin? Because at this point in time, there is no specific definition, and there's certainly no definition around data standards and data protocols. So, so digital twin can mean more than one thing. But it's the way I see it is as a as a model of the real world, using data to simulate the real world, and then using that data to learn and to experiment and to draw sensible conclusions. The best digital twin model of the UK in the UK at the moment is produced by Birmingham University. They've been working on it for many years, and it's got different elements in it. Some look at the detail of wheel-rail interface and all the mechanics of how a railway works, and then it simulates the timetable, and its final interface is a picture of the line side, and you can actually sit in a cab and drive the train in the model. And it's an all-encompassing model of the network, and we can use it to test timetable and analyse the problems with timetables. We can use it to test vulnerabilities with various assets. We can simulate driver operation, and it is just a really good piece of work that's been done by a leading UK university. We've got smaller models. We've got as Paul mentioned earlier, we use a bridged analysis technology. So we fly a drone over a bridge, we create a 3D point cloud, that creates a digital twin of the bridge, and then we can use artificial intelligence to analyse that image and to identify defects. And that saves us sort of scaffolding out the bridge and makes the inspection a whole lot more efficient and more effective. So we've got many different twins for individual assets such as bridges, but the best all-encompassing twin has been produced by Birmingham University, and that's absolutely brilliant and world-class.
And just to add to your question on who should be sort of leading on this, and that is where if we take the railway system, we take roads, and because we're talking about the transport data, this does need a really clear collaboration, engagement sort of rules, and just that's where the government can be of tremendous help to have that view of what's going on in other sectors and bringing those together, because when you start working on something, you get wrapped up in it. So it's really useful to bring the different sectors together, and then of course we're talking about. I don't know. I'm not a specialist, not an engineer, whether that even could be hosted in one place. Maybe it is a collection, like a neural network of different twins.
I think just to add to those points, I think just give another example of like the usage and who would be using it. There was a digital twin project in San Francisco where we looked at sensors on the traffic network and looked at the light rail as well. And there was lots of benefits out of optimising. For example, 11 intersections were optimised. It gave roughly a 20% benefit in road rail transit times for passengers. So there's lots of really good examples of isolated use of digital twins. I think central, and to add to kind of Milda's points around how do we make that kind of a connected digital twin, I think that comes back to what Martin mentioned earlier around kind of having standards, the standards panels, the standards catalogues in place, so that when everyone's publishing data, we can embed kind of linked data formats. We can bring that together, and then that builds that connectivity. But it needs that to be cross-sector, because it's not just rail or highways, or as we touched, weather data. So it's kind of that needs to be wider than just a rail initiative. So it's an actual digital twin.
I endorse that. I just want to move into a slightly different space in terms of we're talking very much about data collection. I mean, Chair introduced earlier that even the direction a farmer ploughs his field could have an impact on different things. So there's obviously so many different potential impacts of data. Therefore, you're collecting so much data. A phrase that we've all heard for many times is you can't see the wood for the trees. You need to be able to get the right access to that data. Data, as we know, it's a commercial opportunity for people these days. So it's seen as something that has value. But there's also the challenge of, I don't know, for want of a better phrase, malign actors, getting into the same data. How do you manage the data pot in such a way that you're getting value out of it, but without putting risk into it at the same time? How do we do that? Maybe if I start with Milda and this time for a change.
I might refer that to Martin. Martin
All right.
is a specialist of safety and data.
So I think there's a couple of questions that you've asked there. First of all, seeing the wood for the trees. The latest technology really helps us to do that. I'll give you a really good example. We've got an experimental technology at London Bridge Station on the CCTV system. We've got 2,000 CCTV cameras in the station. No operator could scan them all at the same time. So we've got a project where we brought lots of actors into the station to assault one another, bring weapons into the station, and we trained artificial intelligence to interpret the images. So there's this huge data feed. We've trained the artificial intelligence, and now if somebody does something that's a concern, it flags it up on the CCTV screens because we've trained artificial intelligence to interpret this massive amount of data, which I think is really clever. So you can see the wood for the trees using that sort of technology.
That would be replicatable across other stations. It's not just.
So it's something that we're developing at the moment, and that's that's a technology that's under development. Then the question of cyber security is absolutely vital. So we have invested heavily in a cyber security centre in Manchester. We have people round the clock in that centre monitoring our databases and monitoring our network. We can see who is dialing into our network at any moment in time and where they're dialing from. When a database gets downloaded, the alerts flag up on the screen. So I was in there a couple of weeks ago and somebody was downloading a structures database about bridges. The alarm flags up on the screen. The operators check who's downloading it. It's a structures engineer. It's sensible. It's not something to raise concern. But if people are accessing data that they shouldn't, or people are dialing in from places that would be of concern to us, and we've got all sorts of continuous monitoring on the network, our cyber security centre is there to protect the network from those kind of issues.
Anything to add?
Just maybe to add on the vast amount of data, and just coming back to the point where we're saying is starting to we need to start to understand what we're trying to solve, and then it becomes a bit clearer what data do we need, because you're right, there's a lot, and sometimes when we say, can you share your data, we get an answer, well, which one? We have so much. But if we really understand the challenges that the infrastructure owners or the train operator companies or local authorities have, is then we really can think about what do we need. So starting from a problem and then seeing what we have and what we don't have.
And just to add, I think as well as having too much data, there's remembering that we can't always collect data about everything. So it's recognising what's in the data, what's not, and what assumptions or how we collect data to fill the gaps. And I think also there's and it comes back to the discussion on standards and is making sure that the data which is published and is used is gone through data governance and is checked and is right to be used, and we know what it's being used for. So I think they're just 2 points to build.
Yeah, I think just to build on your point, Paul, just as a specific, we get involved as parliamentarians in many things, and I once went to Farthingdales to look at what they were doing there, and the integrity of data was more important than actually anything else, because that's what the decisions were going to be on. So the actual testing of integrity is absolutely critical to what you do, and I endorse that. Chair.
Thank you. I'd just like to pick up on one of the points Paul mentioned, and that's the commercial value of the data. It is a commodity. And while the Transport Data Strategy document says there should be an open by default approach, I'd like just to tease out a little bit more about, as the railways are currently structured, is there a disincentive financially for operators or Network Rail or anyone else to share the data? And as the railways are restructured, what considerations do we need to give to enabling that open by default approach?
Yes, so I mentioned that in my pitch as well. The data only has value when you start using it and getting insight. And there are various ways of how you can use it. So there will be data sets that are and will be open by default and accessible for everyone. And there will be data sets that might be under commercial licenses. So Rail Data Marketplace allows that to do. So if you want to publish it and make it open for everyone, you can do. If you want to only share with universities, you can do that as well. I think what we need to, and what's happening already, it's when we have the leaders, the sort of the pioneers are starting to use data and show the value, and then the rest sort of follows. So we do need those champions and those innovators, trailblazers, to start using and showing, and then it's a conversation. You know, we see how and react. It doesn't need to be sort of a blanket approach.
Martin or Paul, do you have anything?
To build on, I think from a projects perspective, where we're doing transportation projects, there's kind of new contracting models coming to fore now. So Network Rail have embraced the Project 13 model recently, and that very much incentivises organisations to work together in more of an ecosystem approach and share data throughout that kind of value chain of data and understand the ecosystem. So the potentially traditional models do become a barrier, but in sort of more the ecosystem type models and collaborative models and working kind of cross industry, there is kind of ways of unlocking that, I think, and that comes down to leadership and getting the right approaches in place, I think.
So I think the principle of open data is sound, because you never know how people can make use of it and collaborate and provide good solutions for passengers. There's a really good example of us putting on the web data about the availability of our lifts and escalators. So if a disabled passenger gets to King's Cross Station and wants to go to Waterloo, knowing that the lifts are working at both ends means they don't go down onto the underground and then finally get to Waterloo and have to turn back. So that sort of data made available to an app developer can offer real benefit to passengers who need the information. But then we also need to think very carefully about what we release, because we wouldn't want to release data that was of use to terrorists. We wouldn't want to release data that was commercially sensitive, and therefore I think the principle is sound, but we always need to be thoughtful about how the data might be used, and to think quite carefully about what we release.
And my question then would be, who then polices that? Who makes that decision?
Yeah. So for Network Rail data, we will take a view on what we release. By and large, if it's not commercial security or people sensitive, we would want it to be out there, because people developing apps are really clever, and they can find all sorts of solutions that help passengers. So the principle of it being open is sound where we can, but we just need to be mindful of sensitive data to make sure that we think about that and apply judgment. And I think that's how we work.
I appreciate that's for your data and Network
Yes.
Rail, but building on what we've been discussing, if we get to a point where you're accumulating data from Network Rail, from Hitachi Trains, from whoever, and you've built up this much bigger model, who polices that?
I think that's where the legislation that you'll be scrutinising really comes in. By having one guiding mind for the railway, it allows you to make better decisions about that sort of thing. So Great British Railways will be able to take an overview about railway data, and if it's more joined up, there's less barriers between parts of the railway. I think it's possible to make better decisions.
And if I might be slightly cheeky and ask, given that the legislation in draft was only published yesterday and we'll be doing our scrutiny of it, from what you've seen of the draft bill, is it going to enable GBR to do these kind of tasks?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, the first clause is the key, isn't it? Creating a network guiding mind governing body, and I think the creation of an organisation that can take an overview, that can break down barriers and get things working in a more joined up way, I think that's tremendously helpful.
And what we're always saying, the importance of involving the suppliers, the contractors, people who develop these technologies day in, day out. They are specialists in it and they work in the railways or outside the railways. It's absolutely crucial to engage early. So this is really a good opportunity now to have these dialogues and build something that works for the entire sector.
I'd like now just to turn to the sort of operational decisions that are made on the back of the data that you collect. So in the storms that hit the country in recent weeks, a number of operators, ScotRail for example and others, decided we're going to suspend all services. I'm not asking you to judge is that the right call or not, but to what extent would they have used the predictions, the data that would be available, that it was just too dangerous to run trains over a particular line or network given the conditions? I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, are we being overcautious at the minute, and is there a role for data to make more informed decisions as to whether services should run or not?
So I think if you take Scotland as an example, they have somebody in their control centre who constantly monitors the weather data that is coming in. We've got the best weather models that we can get. Following the Carmont accidents, we employed an expert, Dame Julia Slingo, who is the chief scientist at the Met Office, to give us advice on how we could get the best weather models and data. And that advice has helped us to improve the weather data we get. So the Scottish Control Centre is getting good information on weather forecasts, and then our engineers have provided guidance on how how a weather forecast will translate into an impact on the network, and they've applied that guidance. Now, what we can do with data is to create ever more sophisticated models. The model that I described for that we're trialling on West Coast North takes that to the next level, and it's really clever because it takes the whole system risk. If you impose a speed restriction, then trains will see more red signals. You increase the risk of signals passed at danger. So imposing a speed restriction creates a secondary risk. It protects the risk of a train hitting a bank slip, but it increases the number of red signals. And the RSSB model is all-encompassing, and it allows us to find the optimum speed and to balance, what speed is it reasonably practicable to run the trains at, and it's a really clever way of answering that question. So we have good data, we do analysis of that data, and we have people in our control centres, but the next generation of models will allow us to take that to the next level.
Well, this is where the UK Rail Research and Innovation Network really can come in handy. It's a partnership of academia and private sector and rail clients. And UK Rail Research and Innovation Network, they have a centre of excellence in digital systems and specifically focusing on railway sector as well. So that's where you can take the data and you can take the modelling and work with researchers and people who work on the railways every day and really run these models and see how your decision impacts the change. So you can do a lot of that with academia, and it's really good.
Only comment really to add on, agree with all the points raised. I think is obviously currently whether that's in the scenario you made there or in design and engineering, there's a number of assumptions, and the more data we capture and the more sophisticated models get, the more we can either validate those assumptions or realise those assumptions might be conservative. So I think using data and more sophisticated models can help address those.
Paul, you wanted to?
No, and just we've talked a lot about the amount of data, the data that you're getting, the data that where it can be used, where it can be secured. I think an obvious question is, where's the gaps? Are there any data pots that aren't getting filled, that are more difficult to find the information out on, that would be particularly helpful, do you think? I'll start with Paul, just for a change.
For me, I think part of what we suffer from is legacy assets and new assets, and also legacy systems and new systems. Some of the older systems across all transportation weren't necessarily designed to get information out, more designed for information in. And again, with older assets, we might not have full digital twin models. So I think as we're building more and more new assets, or surveying more assets, fixing more, we're getting more information. But I think for me, it's the whole piece of having legacy infrastructure and legacy systems. So there's lots of examples with organisations now introducing new systems to bring data together. We did work for Govia Thames Link Railway around exactly that. So I think they're where the gaps are, and it's sometimes that comes to the data sharing. Sometimes it's not necessarily reluctance to share data, but it's difficult to share data. And also you need to really understand the data to be able to interpret it, because it wasn't built to, as we not to touch on again, but kind of standards and things like that. So I think they're probably the gaps we generally see. I don't know if,
I absolutely agree with those points, and to plug those gaps, the collaboration is important. So we have a lot of pilots, a lot of research done, just things are happening in the sector in various areas. So bringing all that together and working in collaboration is important. Sometimes we maybe, I had an example, as somebody was saying, we have a tunnel, and to understanding how cracks appear in a tunnel is not, just one tunnel is not enough. You need to have a lot of data to start predicting patterns. So an opportunity to plug into other infrastructure asset owners and say, can we share this data? Can we work together and just figure out how infrastructure behaves? That's where it's important.
So I think I have to agree with what's been said. I think the biggest issue, as Paula said, is old assets. So when the Victorians built the railway, they put good drainage in. Over the years, some of the records have got lost, and over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been surveying the whole network to find drainage assets and to make sure that our database is up to date. And we've invested a lot of work in making sure that we gather that sort of information about hidden old assets. So that's a good example where we've had to invest extra time and resource in mapping and surveying the network. I think there's lots of opportunity in the future to gather more data from passenger trains, as we've said earlier. And our other area that we need to work on is good asset data requires very precise positioning. So GPS has only got a certain accuracy, but to really analyse assets, you need to get it down to a much greater accuracy. So we end up using other sensors in addition to GPS to get the positional accuracy. And I'm hoping that quantum technologies could take that a step further in the future. So I don't think we've got major gaps in our asset databases, but I think there's things that we can improve, and there's lots of opportunity for the future. Yeah.
The railways have a finite budget to spend, and there's always going to be a tension between maintaining existing assets and investing in new assets, new railway lines, new stations, whatever. Do you get a sufficient proportion of the investment budget to look at data, given that particularly it's a spend to save sector, that if you're able to intervene earlier in infrastructure maintenance, that prevents a more costly repair later on? Is there a sufficient amount of the budget given to the data side?
I believe the answer to that is yes. So if you take the last funding control cycle for Network Rail, the operations, maintenance, the settlement for maintaining the network for CP6 was 43.5 billion. In the same money, CP7, which starts in April this year, is 43.1 billion. So the funding for the network is, I think, is sufficient. The maintenance budget will increase. The renewals will reduce slightly. but investment in data is healthy. So our intelligent infrastructure project for our CP6 control period was £300 million. We've allocated £120 million already for control period 7. So we are investing heavily in data and our intelligent infrastructure project, and I believe the funding for the network that's been determined by Office of Road and Rail, I believe that's right.
Thank you. And another potential impediment to maximising the use of data is skills gaps and shortages. Milda, your written evidence, you noted that the rail sector, quote, suffers a perennial skills shortage in technical roles. How do we address that to make sure that we've got the skills base that can maximise the use of the potential of data?
The beauty of working with the new technologies and data and new analytic tools that yes, on one hand, you do really need highly skilled people who understand the technology, who understand the data, and you need those people in the traditional sort of engineering companies. But it also makes it more accessible. So the example I shared about the interlockings, when previously the data was only understandable to very people with very specific technical knowledge, becomes more understandable and accessible to the wider people with some training. So it is the ability to make sure that the people who already work in the industry are aware of the technology changes, are being trained and upskilled. But there's also, if we are optimizing one areas where we predict and prevent maintenance, maybe we can think about those teams and think about what they can do instead of going on track and fixing faults all the time, let's just say. But that requires organizational change. So we do need to think about the skills. On one hand, we have big shortage. On the other hand, we're optimizing our workforce. So how we can think about the organization and where we best to use the people we already have.
I appreciate there's a wider challenge the country has in having people with the relevant engineering and technical skills. But Martin, could I maybe ask from Network Rail's perspective what your strategy is to increase the skills base?
So I think when we're developing new technologies, our research programme works with lots of small to medium enterprises who've got innovative people, real deep technical skills. And I could quote about 17 research projects that are using artificial intelligence in one way or another as an example. And what we're generally doing is turning to organisations that have got deep technical specialist skills in those areas. And then once we've found something that works, our strategy is to train our workforce to use the new tools. So we've got a healthy research programme, £250 million during the last control period. We've used that with lots of small to medium enterprises who've got real deep technical skills to develop new products. And then once we've got them to the point of rollout, we're training people to use those tools. And I think that combination works effectively.
Great. Thank you. Gavin, Paul, do you have any additional questions?
One brief last question. Thanks so much, Chair. And good morning. Sorry for being late for this morning's session. There's one thing I want to come back just briefly on something that you said earlier, Martin, about you can tell who's dialing in. I think you used the term dialing in. Who's dialing in and where they're dialing in from. Would it not be possible to mask that in any way in terms of a cyber security point of view?
So,
obviously, maybe I watch too many films and TV programmes.
Of course, it's always going to be a game of cat and mouse between the people who are manning the security centre and the cyber criminals who are developing better tools and using AI and all sorts of other technology. But we have a really well-resourced security centre. We get good advice from the experts, and we don't just rely upon one support contract. So we use Microsoft to a large extent, but we have other tools from other suppliers. So we've got a diversity of tools from a number of suppliers. We've got a well-organised cybersecurity centre, and we recruit graduates who've got really good skills into that centre. So we've got a strong team. We're supported by good suppliers, and we're using the latest technology. Now I can't sit here and say never, because of course the hackers are constantly developing their technology. But we take this seriously. We resource it properly with good people and good suppliers.
And lastly, I've been contacted by a couple of folk over the last few months, not necessarily about this, but it's made me think some. This is a bit of a left field question for you, but obviously since the pandemic, we've had the conspiracy theorists of the world have united in many ways on many issues, and data is one of the issues that they seem to coalesce around, and the sharing of it, and obviously all the privacy issues that entails, etc., etc. Is that something that's come up in your line of work? I should rather suspect it's more likely to come up for us as politicians, as we're challenged by the public at large in terms of what we're doing with their data, or what we're allowing to be done with their data. Has that come up in your line of work thus far in terms of the potential problems there, or do you have any advice for us in our dealing with the public? Because that is potentially an increasing concern and something we will have to be aware of as politicians.
I mean, it's something that we have to manage carefully. We're subject to freedom of information requests in exactly the same way that you are. So I imagine that the way our organisation works is very, very similar. So we're subject to data protection. Every year we get each department to confirm that it's compliant with the relevant policies. We have an owner for each of our corporate systems, so that we make sure that we're compliant with the various requirements. And where the public asks questions, we're totally transparent in what we can provide, unless it's commercially sensitive or security related. We would always try to be very open.
Logical answers doesn't always satisfy a conspiracy theorist, I'm afraid, but there we are.
But we'll try and be open because it's in our interests. Yeah.
Thank you. I fear the clock is against us, and we have another panel to hear from this morning. So for now, can I thank the three of you very much indeed for your time and evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
And welcome to our second panel this morning, again for the purposes of our records. I invite each of you to state your name and organisation, please. And starting on my left, Mr. Thacker.
Rupert Thacker, from Hertfordshire County Council, representing ADEPT.
Good morning, I'm Yogesh Patel. I'm the Quality Improvement and Innovations Director at Ringway.
Good morning, I'm Davin Crowley-Sweet and I'm Chief Data Officer at National Highways.
Thank you, and again we are grateful for your time and evidence this morning. If I can start off putting to you the same open question I gave to the first panel, and that's just to set out how you are using data to improve the monitoring, delivery and maintenance of road infrastructure in the country. Mr. Thacker, if I start with you.
So from a local authority point of view, we regularly carry out a number of different inspections, utilising everything from coarse visual inspections, data we gather through scanner, and then newer technology with cameras and assisted technology on the network, and adopting AI to help us understand both the quality of the asset and the point at which intervention provides us with the best and most efficient way of maintaining it and extending it, but also how new technologies can help us intervene at the right point in time and not only make a difference to the quality of the infrastructure, but also be more sustainable in the way that we deliver asset improvements as we invest in it.
From a highways contractor and service provider point of view, we manage and maintain around 50,000 kilometres of roads across the country for strategic roads and local authority roads. And we use data in a number of ways to understand the condition of the assets better, understand the basic inventory that we're working with our clients' asset management systems, plan and program and optimize our operational activities. So, for example, we use artificial intelligence to predict the deterioration of the road network so that we can plan the most optimum solution in terms of different types of treatments, as well as using robotics and drones and things like that to try to understand how we can use data to optimize our operational activities.
So I should start by saying that we believe that better data equals better decisions, and that ultimately helps us achieve our purpose of connecting the country safely and reliably, delivering economic improvement and environmental gain. We have a digital road strategy which sets out how we intend to use data, digital and technology over the near futures in how we operate differently in 3 areas. So they're largely how we offer a different customer service of using data to be able to get data into people's cars so they can plan better journeys better safely and feel more confident and in control of their journeys. How we can offer a different way of operating and maintaining our network, moving towards preemptive interactions on our network so we find, predict and prevent issues rather than find and fix them. And then largely how we deliver our capital portfolio of how we can deliver more autonomous ways of working, more off-site and modular ways of working, and improve the reliability and of the construction schemes that we do.
Thank you. And just to help illustrate that, can you give a couple of specific examples of where using data has led to an earlier intervention that was less disruptive, less costly, just to sort of help us encapsulate what the potential of this is?
So we've developed a tool in-house known as the operational working window, and that brings together a number of data sets and uses artificial intelligence over those data sets to understand the flows of traffic and how we can better maintain the network. So if we understand where all the maintenance is going to be from the various numbers of systems, if we can pull that together, if we can then overlay that with the traffic arrangement and work out the right way to set traffic extents, the right distances and right times to optimise traffic windows, ultimately grouping maintenance together in ways that helps us achieve our goals of achieving a better maintenance unit rate, but also making sure that we don't impact the customer in terms of the flows to the network as we do it.
I'm trying to get to a specific example on a particular bit of motorway or trunk road or wherever where you've done something differently than you would have done in the past because of
we've applied that technology on a national rollout over the last RIS2 period.
But what I'm trying to get to is the potential cost savings that if you do the maintenance differently because of data, it will lead to a 10% saving, 50% saving. I'm just trying to get a ballpark of the potential here.
In terms of cost savings, I think it would be best if I wrote into the committee afterwards with actual numbers that demonstrate the value.
I appreciate that. I don't expect you to come with every last fact in front of you. Do either of the other witnesses have an example they could give as an illustration?
If I may, we use computer vision, which is basically mobile phone technology mounted on our vehicles, operational vehicles that are sort of traversing the network all the time, to capture images of the road network and then overlay that with artificial intelligence to understand condition of the network. So identify potholes, identify fading white lines, signs that may have should be there but aren't there because the data can compare the asset management system with what the computer is seeing, So we're able to identify potential problems earlier, work with our clients, and we're doing that in Hertfordshire and a few other authorities, to intervene earlier before the problem becomes a major problem, and we have to react in an emergency way, which is much more difficult, more inefficient. So that's one example. Another example, on our PPP contracts, we have something called asset optioneering model, which is a long-term model combining the scanner information together with inspection information of the condition of the road network, and inbuilt within that model is a predictive model where we're looking at a whole life cost of the asset. So determining whether we carry out a relatively small surface resurfacing activity or do a major reconstruction, and considering that over a 32-year period, which is the sort of life of the PPP contract plus the handback conditions. So two specific examples where data is absolutely crucial to that, and we're building that those tools more and more each day.
Again, from a local authority perspective, what's the potential saving from using this?
I can't quantify the saving, but it's certainly significant. Just for example, across the industry, there's been quite a lot of work around sensors. Use gullies, drainage as an example, whereby sensors have been installed into drainage systems to help understand whether or not some parts of the network are more susceptible to silt and debris collecting than others. So rather than just going around in a cyclical routine and emptying them yearly or every 18 months, what you actually do is you use those sensors and that intelligence that's built up over a period of time to help you minimise the level or optimise the level of intervention that you take, rather than visiting them all regularly. You visit the ones that need it most more regularly and save yourself the time and cost of the others. So clearly that technology can provide quite an extensive saving over the thousands of kilometres that local authorities maintain.
Thank you. And again, a similar question to one we put to the first panel. Looking internationally, where does the UK sit? Are we a leader of the pack in looking at deploying this technology, or are there other countries further ahead that we can learn from?
So I think we're always open to learning. I do think we're at the top of the pack when it comes to digital data and technologies. We work with the Conference of European Directors for Roads as pulling together internationally. We do benchmarking where we've been abroad specifically to Asfinag in Austria, where we've seen how they work. I think we do really well in the digital twin element of it, and that's both connected digital twins where we're linking with other digital twins across local authorities and across other bodies, and on where we're doing on connected services, which is where we're trying to work with public and private sector companies to make our data available in real time to people's sat-navs, cars and devices that they use while they're travelling.
Thank you.
I think if we're looking to the future in terms of how the network operates and looking to the future of connected autonomous vehicles, then I think there are places outside of the UK that are perhaps far better, far more advanced. We carried out a tour of China last year, and our assessment is that they are something like 7 to 10 years ahead of Europe in terms of their development of the infrastructure and the connected autonomous vehicles and how they're operating. So there are commercial operators operating in China, driverless taxis, robo-taxis operating, junctions that are fully digitalized and creating digital roads to improve safety, improve congestion. So there are places like that are far further ahead. In terms of pure asset maintenance, we are probably on par in terms of the condition of our road to other countries. But in terms of the operations of the network and looking to the future, there are other countries like that are further ahead.
From a local authority point of view, I would say that we are, in terms of our digital twins, digital expertise and knowledge, compared to other countries, I can't say specifically, but we're certainly not at the level of National Highways Network Rail in kind of the ability and the knowledge of the network. It's in many ways, dare I say, more complex. It's got numbers of different users. It's more extensive. It's possibly more historic in some instances as well. So I think that there's work to do around understanding local authority networks more, to be able to bring them up to a par and to be able to connect them to some of the bigger assets that the national bodies operate.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to go back on a detailed point first, and then I want to talk about data. But just a specific question, and I think it's probably to yourself, Davin, is what is a digital road? And how does that differ from an analogue one? And how would my experience as a driver differ if I was using a digital road to a non-digital road? Can you just explain that in the short story, if you like, for the record?
Well, I would describe a digital road as where we're integrating digital data and technologies into the journey itself. That can be both our infrastructure. We have over 100,000 technology assets on the road at the moment, software assets, cameras, stopped vehicle detection, etc., that we use to collect data that we use to inform how we regulate and how we set signs and speeds and signals. But it's also about how we then put information and work with companies like Google or Waze to make our data available to them in real time about where we may be closing a road, the signs and speed in a road, or to freight information of how high or low is a bridge, so that those data sets are available to them when they're planning their journeys and whilst they're in the car in their journeys. And we're working towards making that data available this year so that that's available in their cars in real time. So I would describe that digital road as that, which is how those technologies integrate with the customer experience.
So how would I see that if I was as a driver?
I think in the future, I can say what our plans might see is we aim to make our data available so that if you're using a sat-nav, obviously we have no control over which data sets the sat-navs provide, albeit we're actively working with them and we feel positive about the relationships we have with them. You would start seeing road closure information on your thing so that these companies could then reroute the traffic with the knowledge of where we've closed the road, as an example.
And do you see that? I mean, I think some of that's already there, isn't it, in certain packages to a degree. Do you think that would become more comprehensive? I mean, obviously there's more data for a motorway than there is for the back road between Trimdon and Fishburn in my constituency, sort of thing. Do you think that sort of data pool will become more pervasive of more different roads?
I think so. I think this the work we're doing, I think, is positive. I think that data is an asset in its own right and it has value, and I think the more we can use it, the more that value will be exposed, and I think that will create the pool where more organisations and companies will be open to using it.
I just want to move back into a similar question to what you probably heard me ask earlier in the rail session, in terms of what are the gaps in data? What are we talk about the pools of digital twins and things like this, but again, are there gaps that you would like to see people starting to create the data pools that would enhance the digital roads of the future? But I'll start with yourself again, and then I'll come along with the panel.
So rather than talk about data sets in the first instance, I think it's worth understanding the skills and capabilities involved with making data and making sure it's available. And I think there's a really important skill that we ought to be focusing on about understanding the needs of what people need, what data for what purpose, so we can collect it to that level of quality that they need it for. And then how do we make that data available, and then how do we ultimately build the skills so that that data can be used to generate value. And I think if we invest in, which we are investing in those capabilities, there's probably less missing data than people think. I think generally there's a data confidence problem as opposed to a data quality problem for a lot of the built environment. But equally, there are older assets, similar to the Network Rail session. Drainage, obviously, these assets were installed a long time ago, many before the digital data and systems existed, but we're working with the likes of NUAR, the National Underground Register, as a means of collecting those data sets, especially the geographic ones, and pooling them to make sure they're available to us too.
Yeah. Yogesh?
If I may, I think there's a huge disparity between the quality of data that we have on local authority roads compared to national highways. To answer your earlier question about what is a digital twin, I think we need to start from a base level of having a digital twin. You asked about digital roads. We need to start with a base level of having a digital twin of all of our road assets, not just the highway, but the drainage, the barriers, the lighting, the bollards, etc. And across all the authorities that we work with, there is a disparity between the quality of that data and the completeness of that data. So the first part of a digital road is having that complete, accurate, up-to-date digital twin of the road network.
Can I just interrupt you just to build on the point? Sorry, I apologise for interrupting. Obviously, when we were talking in the rail session, we were talking about trains and cameras and the different things that were there. I think I've read somewhere that from a local authority point of view or a more localised road position, that there's the opportunity of putting cameras, I don't know, on refuse collection vehicles or things like this that go around and collect the data. Do you see that as something that is happening, or is it just a potential for the future? Sorry for interrupting.
It's happening. We're doing it on our own inspection vehicles, and I know many authorities are already installing those sorts of cameras on refuge vehicles, and some are doing on buses as well, and no doubt Rupert will be able to add to that as well. But just in terms of building on that, it's not just the digital twin, it's the way that the road is actually operating in real time that will get us towards a digital road. So that requires connectivity, full 5G connectivity, short-range connectivity that enables the real-time information to be presented to the travelling public, whether they're in the car, walking, cycling, or any other types of movement. And just one example of that is we work with a company called One Dot Network, previously known as Elgin, where our tablets link up directly with their systems, so that in real time, when we put the first cone out, we press a button, and in real time that information goes directly to the sat-nav companies, because they've got a partnership with all the major sat-nav companies. So that sort of those sorts of technologies and possibilities are already happening today. We need to perhaps expand on those.
Sorry, thanks. Mr. Thacker.
In terms of gaps, I think certainly in terms of the overall ambition around transport, one of the bigger gaps we've got is actually understanding who's using the network, when and why and how. So that back to that question of what's the purpose of the data, and actually understanding that we're very good generally at counting cars, counting vehicles, but we're not necessarily so good at counting people that are walking, cycling, scooting, and actually understanding that interaction between how the network is operated and maintained and how people want to use it. So I think there is that layer of information that kind of sits between the operation and maintenance, but the use of it, that certainly for local authorities is quite a challenge to understand across the board what that looks like.
Yeah, I think you used an important word, I thought, in the sentence there as well, that it's not just how people are using it now, but maybe how they would like to use it. I've sat in the local authority space before, and whether it be buses or things that have been dropped off because of this, that, and the other, that there's a need to understand what the public demand is. And I think the world has changed so much post-COVID as to where demand patterns are. I would suggest that demand patterns is probably one of the big conundrums in terms of the data pots. Yeah, back to you, Chair.
Davin.
Thanks so much, Chair. As we've spoken so far as to what's possible and what's actually being done at the moment, but if we can maybe go into the barriers that still exist at this point in time. I suppose in the rail session we mentioned that the draft bill might open up opportunities to use data more effectively moving forward. But if I can ask, and I'll start with you, Davin, if I can, in terms of the barriers to further advancing data usage in the development and maintenance of road infrastructure. I mean, clearly we're just coming out of winter. I mean, roads in the west coast of Scotland at this point in time are not in the best state because of all the rain and the freezing thaw, etc. So it's particularly pertinent for areas like mine at this point in time. But what are those barriers at the moment, and what actions are necessary to overcome those barriers in your view to use the data more effectively?
I wouldn't so much call them barriers as I think, because I think most of the things are achievable if with the right focus and leadership.
My glass is empty, guys, so that's why I called them barriers.
So I think in the Network Rail session, the previous session, we spoke about the skills. I think that's an area of focus, and our work in working with early talent pipelines and graduates to make sure that people recognise that the roads is an attractive place to work for a career, and bringing them in early to a career is really important in attracting the right digital data skills. Clearly there's then working with the talent that we've got in the organisation about preparing them, making data much more transferable if you want to choose a career outside of digital and technology, as opposed to people trapping in a single discipline. And then I think working with our supply chain sector to make sure that they've got forward advance of our plans and the long-term thinking of our digital and aspirations, so they can size themselves and gear themselves accordingly to our needs of the future. From a legislative perspective, I don't think there's actual barriers. We've seen the work around the AI policies that are coming through central government, and also the work on connected autonomous vehicles, which I think are going to enable a lot. I would say that on the subject of naked roads, i.e. a road without infrastructure where everything's digital controlled, I think if we are serious as a country about going that direction, then we need to think about legislation that recognises the data asset. Right now, the legislation is very much geared towards the physical infrastructure, a physical sign, a physical space. And if we really want to move to have a naked road with less physical infrastructure, I think we need our legislative framework to recognise the digital assets that it would be replaced by.
Anything to add?
I think agree with many of the points that Davin has made, but in addition, I'd say standards and consistency of data integration between the different networks, not just road networks, but ensuring that the road and the rail network and the buses and the freight operators can use the data that's being generated and gathered in a consistent way, and we probably need that standard for that interoperability of data. The other thing I would say is that we need a bold, ambitious vision from government around where we want the transport system to be of the future, because then the data sets around that can be built, the investment in the right sort of areas can be made, and I think that there's that missing piece. We produced a report last year working with various authorities and TRL and Department of Transport around local digital roads, and one of the key recommendations was for the need for a central long-term strategic vision on where we take digital roads of the future and how we get there.
And Davin said there's not necessarily any legislative barriers at the moment, but do you think it still needs more direct action from government, not in terms of perhaps leadership or whatever? Are you quite happy with the direction of travel from a governmental perspective? Mr. Thacker?
I think leadership from government is always really useful to help focus local authorities' ability to deliver on that ambition when it's left slightly more fluid in terms of the direction. I think people tend to take different approaches, even if they're aiming broadly in the same direction. I think to be smarter and to be more efficient, that clarity that is provided is often really useful, with some governance that sits around it to help share the learning and to maximise the kind of efficiency through which it's delivered. So I think one of the challenges is making sure that there's sufficient opportunity for people to that are gathering data, are undertaking research and developing new ideas, to be able to share that, and for that learning to spread quickly and effectively through local government, so that there's not a kind of repetition or reinventing the wheel happening, which I think is quite a risk with a rapidly changing set of technologies.
And lastly for me, Mr. Patel, obviously if you want to say anything about any necessary government leadership or other steps government can take, then more than happy to hear it. But in your written evidence to the inquiry, you said that asset owners not having sufficient incentives to invest in comprehensive data collection and maintenance of their assets can result in outdated or inaccurate information. So, in your view, what can be done to better incentivise investment in data collection?
I think it's picking up the point that Davin made, which is, placing value, real monetary value on the data. At the moment, it's only the physical assets that are valued. So I think that would help. The reason I talk about that sort of long-term vision is at the moment the investments are being made on a point basis, individual technologies, individual applications, and they may not necessarily stack up individually. But looking at it as a long-term vision, combining different data sets, combining the mode of transport, not looking at individual modes of transport, but looking at the full journey, then the business case starts to become stronger. So I think that's needed in terms of having a clear strategy from Government Department of Transport, probably a long-term strategy, because to roll out digital roads is not going to be a single parliament investment. It's going to be multiple parliaments. And, I'm perhaps old enough to remember the road widening program or the motorway building program. It almost needs that level of ambition to say this is the direction that we're going to go, because then we can get, we talk about local authorities. It's not just one local authority, it's 155 local authorities. So we need that consistent approach, as Rupert said. I hope I've answered your question.
No, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry that I was late earlier. I just wanted to ask particularly about when we're thinking about investment decisions, how we're using data to actually prioritise what schemes have the greatest benefit, greatest value for that investment. And obviously, there's been lots of discussion about some of the current Green Book strategy and some of the use of data that we use in that. But I was interested in what data is currently being used to particularly identify those benefits of what should be prioritised. Maybe National Highways, if you'd like to kick off on that.
Thank you. So I'd say we follow the DFT and the Treasury standards on how we collect data. They actually define which data you collect and how that data is used. And that data covers a wide range of things from cost, environmental, economic impacts. More and more so now with the improvements that we've been able to do in how we share data. We're working with the subnational transport bodies and arm's length bodies much closer in how we put our portfolios together. But ultimately, when we follow that guidance, when we collect that data and we put those portfolios together, they go to the DFT itself to make the decision on the priorities of which investments go ahead or not.
And is there greater weighting given to certain, for example, the economic value or, as you said, environmental factors? Is there greater weighting given to some of that data than others?
That's not something I actually know the answer to, so if possible I'd like to write back into the committee with a position on that.
Is there anything that...
from our perspective, we don't make investment decisions on schemes, because normally that comes from our clients. But what we do on our PPP contracts, where we do have responsibility for that over a long-term period, is use what I mentioned earlier, the asset optioneering model, to predict the condition, the deterioration of the road network over a long-term period, and then determine what's the most optimum treatment to undertake, both from a carbon perspective as well as a cost perspective, as well as a disruption and meeting the KPIs of the contract. So that is real data being used in real time to make long-term decisions. But the other, as we're talking about data, some of the data that we're perhaps not using, that we perhaps could tap into,
I think that's what we're quite interested in.
Is accident data. So at the moment, safety schemes are determined based on where the accidents are, how many accidents have occurred, etc., based on injury. But for every accident that takes place, there are probably hundreds of near misses that we don't know about, nobody knows about, but the car knows about it, the vehicle knows about it, because the vehicles are probably picking up sensors.
Do you think that might change where we would invest? Because obviously there's only a finite amount of money that we've got.
Perhaps. There's a whole set of data there of near misses, of incidents and accidents that never occurred and therefore never got reported, which we perhaps could tap into in the future, and perhaps help us make better decisions in terms of where safety schemes ought to be invested in.
And in terms of, Mr. Thacker, local authorities, particularly, obviously money is often, tight, and, you've got to prioritise, obviously, but often behind that there's quite an extensive, BCR analysis that you have to go through to show the best value of a scheme and to prove to national government of why they should fund this. Do you think that process is effective? Do you think it's capturing the right sort of data, the right sort of priorities at the moment?
In the first instance, yes, although you could argue that investment is often focused more on journey time savings than some of the other aspects that you might want to be considering longer term around sustainability, shift in mode. So some of the business case development for larger scale projects is I suppose, quite traditional in its approach, and equally some of the asset management approaches that local authorities take around the country. Yes, they look to optimise value and asset, but are they looking to be as sustainable as they can be with the drive to zero carbon and things like that? And again, guidance around how that works and what tools authorities should be using would probably be quite welcomed, I think, to assist local authorities in that process and to make sure that it's considered kind of evenly across the country.
Mm-hmm. How sort of lengthy is that process that you'd go through? Is it quite bureaucratic? Is there quite a lot of
business case development for large scale schemes is significant, but then you're talking significant sums of money. So I think it's probably proportionate, but it is quite intensive. It's particularly intensive in terms of the revenue funding that local authorities are particularly.
You've got very limited resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to. The way that we fund projects perhaps needs looking at in terms of capital and revenue. Sometimes decisions are made where capital monies are constrained and within a pot, but actually spending a little bit more on a more sustainable or deeper treatment may give you better whole life cost decisions, but that comes from a revenue pot and that be a saving on the revenue side. So how that capital and revenue side is looked at in totality perhaps needs to be looked at, because the experience we're seeing is that it's not always done in a whole life cost basis.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of back to national highways, do you think that process is bureaucratic? Would you say, or is there is there anything that could be done to make it more efficient and make it easier to get some of these decisions moving down the line and get that investment happening?
We have colleagues that specialise in the actual process for writing the investment schemes. Mine is more of the corporate role in making sure we're managing the data. So again, I'd have to field a view from my colleagues about their experience of the process itself. What I can say is that, we follow those guidance of what data we're supposed to collect on supporting transport schemes, and we commit to making more of the data we've got available if that helps support it further.
Right.
So just on the point of the data that's required to support business cases, it is often extensive, unsurprisingly, given the scale of the investment, but I think it's also, certainly for local authorities, usually above the level of base data that authorities have access to. So things like national digital twins, national data sets, a standardisation of data and expectation around the use of data to support business cases would, I think, make local authorities' lives much easier if it was more freely available to support that business case development, because as it is, authorities have to put quite a lot of investment, usually revenue funding, into that upfront assessment of the business case that doesn't necessarily result in the outcome of a successful bid. So anything that could be used to create data pools and accessible data that would be able to support that process would be very, very useful.
I mean, obviously here we're talking predominantly about public investment. Do you think this also perhaps deters private investment in some of these schemes?
Potentially. Equally, I would say that probably private companies hold an awful lot of the data that we would value access to, but it can often be quite costly to build up that knowledge and depth of evidence to support business cases. So I think it probably needs a slightly different relationship between the public and private sectors to be able to unlock the value from the data at the right point and to ensure that people can get the reward from it. But again, often maybe the cost up front is a challenge to local authorities to be able to do that.
Thank you. I'd like to just build on that point and some of the other comments that have been made on the sort of commercial value of data. The government's transport data strategy wants an open by default approach, but also recognises there is commercial value. I'm just interested in your thoughts as to how we balance that. So to take, Mr. Patel, your example about the potential use of data from near misses that is held by the cars, presumably the manufacturer would be able to collect that data and know it. How do we balance, as I say, that commercial value with the greater public good of having it open?
I think we need to recognise that whoever collects the data has a cost incurred in collecting that data, so they need to be recompensed for that basic collection costs. But in terms of sharing value, some of this, I mean, that particular example may require legislation that data that's in the public interest must be made available to the relevant authorities, anonymised, of course, so that there's no privacy or security type issues. The other part is the value comes from making the data available and open, and I would wholeheartedly agree with the data strategy, transport data strategy, around making that data open and available, because that then potentially unlocks so many other opportunities for innovators, developers, app developers to create apps and solutions that are of value to customers and the public. You know, the iPhone and Google Play stores are great examples where the real innovation is creating those app stores, creating the API links and opening that up. And that, as we all know, has had so many opportunities and so many developments as a result. The same can occur on the highway network, I believe, and the transport system itself. So I do believe we need to open it up, but we do need to compensate the people who are collecting that data through whatever routes, whether it's through day-to-day contractual activities or a specific survey to be carried out. But then the data belongs to whoever's commissioned that.
And another point you made, a number of you have made, on the sort of strategic direction for using data, that there's a missing piece. Where would that lie? In the rail sector, we've got the potential for using Great British Rail to be that guiding mind. What's the equivalent for road, given you've got a very complex sort of transport landscape, some done by National Highways, some done by individual local authorities, some done by the metro mayors that are being developed. You've got the subnational transport bodies, you've got the DFT. In that mix, who sets that? Who is that guiding mind to set the strategy?
For me, I think it needs to start with the DFT, because we have 150 plus local authorities, and with the best will in the world, even with ADEPT and organisations like ADEPT, we can't. There will always be differences there. National Highways, I think, plays a key role. But I can't speak for National Highways, of course, but I think they have a wealth of knowledge and understanding of these things, and perhaps can help with the technical side of bringing those standards together, bringing a commonality of, certainly from a highways perspective. But as I said, I don't think we should necessarily look at it just from a highways perspective. If we look at it as a transport and mobility of the future, then it needs to be at a DFT level that can bring the different elements of buses, cycling, railway, roads, etc. together.
It should sit at the broad strategy sit with DFT, but then
with the
it can then trickle down to the appropriate.
I think that's where the subnational transport bodies can play a real role in making sure that has relevancy at a regional level, working closely with the local authorities. But of course, I can't speak for local authorities.
I'd agree.
Just my view.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I'd like just to conclude my questions with a couple to Davin on National Highways. We've had some written evidence to the inquiry from the Office of Rail and Road, making some criticisms of National Highways on the quality of the data, the failure to deliver an asset data governance plan. Could you tell us what measures National Highways are putting in place to address these?
So again, start by saying that first and foremost, offering a service to our customers that's both safe and reliable is our number one priority. And we've seen the letter. We're mobilising all the teams to support the ORR in their investigation at the moment, and we remain committed to working with them when they release their recommendations to us shortly, we suspect.
Okay, well, if you could share any information with us at the appropriate point, that would be helpful. And finally, there is, in previous inquiries we've done on strategic roads and our recent scrutiny session with National Highways, we've explored the question of what proportion of the National Highways budget goes into the sort of repairs and maintenance side as opposed to enhancements to the road network. And a particular concern was that the ageing of quite a lot of the digital assets on the road network. Do you think that National Highways is devoting a sufficient proportion of its budget to replacing and upgrading the digital network?
Yes, as I said earlier, we've got nearly 100,000 digital assets to support the operation of our network. We've increased our investment in that over RIS2, and that was an important decision for us. We're seeing much more of the investment shift more towards maintenance and renewals from the enhancements, which we think supports the ageing asset that we've got, especially as technology assets have a habit of becoming obsolescent much faster than the physical assets do. Clearly, RIS3 under negotiation at the moment, but we've had supportive direction in making sure that we're investing proportionately in our technologies.
Thank you. Jack, Gavin, do you have any additional questions? Thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion of today's session. We're very grateful for your time and evidence, which will be very helpful in shaping our report and recommendations. But for now, thank you very much. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding